and good evening, late afternoon, whatever you want to call it. Welcome to this Future Faces professional development event, a special event this month to obviously celebrate Black History Month. And it's all about understanding the importance of cultural diversity and how you implement cultural diversity in the workplace. Now, today's session is going to explore how our individual culture can influence the workplace culture and how we can ensure diversity is celebrated in the workplace. And also how we can allow our culture to empower our voice within our organizations. We'll be hearing from an expert panel of speakers. We've got Asita Madhu from HS2, who'll be talking about the importance of celebrating our culture. We've also got Erica Burke from the HR department, who'll be talking about how we can celebrate cultural differences in the workplace and the effects it has on morale and our legal obligations to diversity and inclusion. And last but certainly not least, we've got Avril Grant from A Vision, who'll be talking about acknowledging your personal cultural difference and allowing it to empower you in the workplace. After the session, we'll have a few question and answers. So if you are listening in today, please feel free to use the chat box or the Q&A box to give us your questions, and I will ask them at the end. Now, let's head over to our first speaker of the day. Asita, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks so much, Kazim. My name is Asita Madhu, Senior Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at HS2. So I look after what we call the supply chain. And in essence, that's all the activities around procurement, tendering, and contract management as it relates to equality, diversity and inclusion. So it's a whole span across the organization. And it's great to speak on this, although I talk to different stakeholders at different points. I just want to share in terms of an overview around culture. You know, culture means different things to different people. It depends on your standpoint and it depends on how you feel included as part of that culture. Within what I call the workplace culture, and these are the things that any organization you join will have a statement, a mission statement often, a values position around what they represent as an organization. And HS2 is no different to that. You know, we have our sort of values statement, if you like, and it covers 4 areas. So we look at things around leadership. You know, what sort of organization are we in terms of leadership status? How do we aspire leaders? And how do we make sure leadership is at the very forefront of what we do as an organization? And we talk about integrity, which is the second part of our values. So what you say is what you do, you know, your word is your bond. And ultimately that is really the confidence people have for HS2. So as an employee, don't say anything you can't deliver, you know, don't make promises you can't keep, because that integrity is really key part of that. And then you talk about things around safety, safety alongside things like construction site, because we're a construction company, an engineering company as well. Safety is really core and important for us as an organization. It creates a culture where people look after each other, not just in the office, but on the construction site. And then, of course, respect, which falls under where you get the equality, diversity, and inclusion, is about respecting each other, not just as colleagues, but respecting each other's differences, and whether those differences are of different gender, ethnicity, etc. And that's an important part of what we stand for. So the 4 elements that you see, though, the principles of values we have at HS2 is what governs us. So joining HS2 means that actually you understand and you live and breathe those values. So what does it mean for individuals when you talk about other types of values? So people will come from different backgrounds, whether those are cultural backgrounds or religious background, etc. And alongside that, we often get people who may speak English as a second language, those who perhaps has other different challenges at work because they feel they cannot be themselves at work. Now, it's very important that my job is around how we break down those barriers based on what the company's culture is and what the individuals bring to the organization, so that they're able to feel themselves and able to express openly. So one of the ways we do that is through our staff networks. Now, some organizations have different setups. They might call it employee engagement networks, etc. But in essence, a staff network allows individuals or group of individuals, often underrepresented, to be able to express some of the things that's going on for them at work or the challenges that they're facing at work. So for example, we've got Black and Ethnic Minority Network called REACH. They've recently just had a name change. And REACH has a good, strong membership. And being that it's Black History Month, they've had lots of events on, which has been really topical. They've had in the past book clubs, which book clubs allow you to actually refer to a particular book and to ask senior leaders what's their thoughts and their steer on those books, but also how they will influence things within the workplace. And what that allows you is not only just to have a voice to talk with those who are similar to yourself in terms of background, but to challenge the norm or barriers or experiences that you've had at work. Now, we know often that some of the barriers that exist and people have experienced include things such as racism within the workplace, and whether that's down to how they're promoted or how they're being employed or the treatment they're receiving as part of their performance review. This is all part of the things that we need to start addressing in the workplace. So having a staff network is really beneficial. And then there's no point having a network without actually having the voice of the senior leaders on board. So the senior leaders will need to make the decision. And every once in a while, you include them as part of those networks. Ask them serious, hard questions. You know, what's your place within the organization? What are some things quite systematic, or why are there barriers in certain places around what you receive as treatment? So we find that actually yourself at work, the better you're able to perform, the better you're able then to engage with other people in the workplace. And one of the things we know, typically, the more senior you go up the organization, the less people you find that looks like you. Whether you're a woman, whether you're somebody from an ethnic minority, or whether you're somebody with disability, you're not going to see that representation at the highest level. And at the highest level, we're talking things beyond middle management. So you're going into sort of senior leadership grade and exec and board level. So culture is very, very important within a workplace. But often we know that the predominant culture dictates how we behave, dictates how we're seen and how we're perceived. And when often I speak to other Black people, whether they be young, whether they be people who are just entering into a career path, one of the things that puts them off joining an organization is they don't see themselves reflected in that organization. When you look on the website, when you look at the recruitment tools, when you look at the events that the organization holds, they don't see themselves as a young Black man, a woman, an Asian, or other minorities being represented. And that in itself is a barrier. So culture is, to me, also something that's visible. It's not just what you say, it's something that actually people can see where they fit in, because their minds are shaped about what's possible once they see themselves in those positions. So we challenge the things that's put out and HS2, whether that's through community engagement. And I was at the Simmer Down Festival for the first time in the summer, and it was actually interesting because we set up a stall with HS2, and that stall was to do two things. One, to get to know the community that's there that we've not engaged with before. And the second thing is to tell them what we do at HS2. And that is around things like job creation, skills program, etc. And majority of people were fine. They welcomed that opportunity. They engaged with us, those that wanted to speak to us. But of course, there were people who were very real in terms of the experience and saying HS2 doesn't work for us, as in they've had a bad experience. They've either applied for a job and things hasn't materialized, or perhaps that they see this as a big white establishment that they don't see how to navigate and get through to. So one of the things we can do to build that sort of cultural inclusion is actually how we engage with minorities across the piece. What are the opportunities available for them in terms of jobs? What opportunities are there for businesses, particularly minority-owned businesses, to work with HS2? And if we're not doing that, then we're clearly not having a very inclusive culture. because ultimately the success of what we do is dependent on that. So I guess that's an all-encompassing thing of how I see culture, both from a work perspective, but also the fact that we all come from different backgrounds. And if we're not able to break down the work culture and be included, we would not have the diverse workforce that we do have. So yeah, quick whistle stop tour. That's what I have to say on culture. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Asita. And it was interesting that you talked about Simmer Down Festival. You know, great to see events back, and specifically cultural events, which I think, you know, are a big part of the makeup of this city. And it surprises me, as someone who used to celebrate, you know, and put on a large cultural event in the city, how difficult it is to get corporates to come out to those cultural events and actually engage with the community. You know, you got 50 to 60,000 people from, you know, BAME demographics attending these events. It's a fantastic opportunity. So well done to HS2 on sort of, you know, putting themselves out there and taking that step. I'm going to move on to Erica Burke now from the HR department to talk about how we can celebrate our cultural differences. Over to
Okay.
you.
Hello, thank you. So yeah, so I'm an HR professional. I'm the director of the HR department in Solihull, and we support a lot of local businesses with their employment and employment law and HR issues. So I'm going to cross it there. There are some things that there's some small crossover with some of the things that you've just heard, which is really good. And I'll just take you through my slides on my perspective about HR in the workplace. So, you know, as it's Black History Month, obviously we're celebrating it, and it's about proud to be. So I can just say that I'm proud to be here on the panel talking about diversity in the workplace. So if we move to this first slide. Okay, so this is, I thought I'd start at the beginning. We've just talked about what workplaces were like, and in some places they still are. So you'll see there's me in the middle, and that's what life in the workplace felt like for me in my early years. We talked about not seeing people around us who looked like us. I started my career in one of the big retailers, national retail, still going today, and they didn't have that. I was familiar with English culture. I was familiar with, you know, its proud history, its inventors, its heroes, its foods. But what I mostly learned about my own culture as I was growing up was, outside of my immediate family, was actually that as Black people, we were either victims or we were villains. I didn't get very much else about where I came from, and there didn't seem to be anyone wanting to celebrate or take much interest in it. And Black culture in the workplace really didn't exist when I started out. Now, of course, things have moved on some way, but we are still way, you know, behind where we need to be. And some of the larger organizations have got some good things going in the way that you've previously heard. Others are still struggling in this area, but globalization has really helping to speed some of that up and creating workforces that are incredibly diverse. And, you know, as human beings, we have a strong emotional need to want to fit in and be part of members of another group. And it might be a team, it might be a peer group, or our work colleagues. And without this sense of belonging, we don't perform at our best. Now, before I go on to talk about a touch on workplace culture, and in actual fact, you've done a little bit already, heard a little bit about that already. I just wanted to take you to just an overview of the social and legal context for equalities in the workplace. So get the next, that's lovely. Okay, so, you know, many of you will have heard of, you know, Windrush. And in, you know, June the 22nd, that was the first major influx of Caribbean people into the UK, 800 people on board. And it marked the beginning of a period of of migration that would see over 500,000 Commonwealth citizens settle in Britain between 1948 and 1971. Huge change for this country, you know, really, really big changes. You've also got the Race Relations Act, 1976. Now, it wasn't the first time there'd been legislation around race, but what this did was it gave Black people the opportunity to actually take their complaints directly to courts and employment tribunals. So this is where employers really had to start thinking about race and tackling it. Some did, many didn't. You know, and it took a while before individuals felt confident enough to access the legal systems to actually get justice. You then got the Macpherson report. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with that, this is a report that was conducted following the murder of Black teenager Stephen Lawrence in 1993. And this report was about the police handling of that case. Now, what the Macpherson report really did was it brought into close the public view the idea of institutionalized racism, which people hadn't really thought much about before. And what it meant was that a lot of public sector bodies had to start looking at their employment practices. They started setting targets about recruiting, retraining and promoting Black and Asian people. So that was, you know, another really important backdrop where people in the workplace and culture started coming in. And then, of course, more recently, 2010, you had the Equality Act, and that brought together all of the disparate bits of employment legislation around discrimination, and it protects employees against discrimination in the workplace from the moment of recruitment right through all the stages of performance, promotions, dismissals, redundancies. And it also makes those public institutions do much more to further equalities and promote and foster good relationships with all the people. And just a quick statistic, I mean, it's not the freshest statistic, but in 2019, 34% of all children born in UK and Wales were actually had one or both parents were born outside the UK. You know, so that is, you know, really, really signals how things, you know, are changing. If we just move on then. So we've already covered, hello? Next slide. Are we going? No? Okay. Okay, so we've already touched on culture, and the point I really wanted to make here was, you know, the culture of the organisation is about the personality, it's the character of the organisation, and we're all built with, people come with lots of different lived experiences, but we all think and behave differently. So working harmoniously under these circumstances doesn't come automatically. It needs to be well managed in the way that you heard previously, in order not to create conflict and misunderstanding. Next slide, please. So why is it good for business? Well, obviously, you can see having a diverse skills base means that you can perhaps offer a broader range of products and services. When people are working together, they see things through different perspectives. That creates an opportunity to learn things you didn't know previously. You can spark off each other and create an opportunity to provide products for different services, different groups. You know, if a business these days wants to compete on an international scale, then they really need to start thinking about business, because we are in a global market. It's very competitive, and you know, you've got new markets of individuals that you can tailor your products to. You know, I can think about a time when I was growing up where a pair of tights, I had a very limited range of tights that I could wear because they were aimed at one particular group. My makeup, I couldn't find makeup that matched my skin easily because it was targeted at one particular group. These things are now changing, and businesses really need to get on board with it because it can really be positive. People are more productive in an environment where they feel valued and respected, and it's the right thing to do. Okay, and if a company, you know, reputations are everything for companies right now. So diversity is key, and much more needs to be done. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's some challenges, you know, and we've talked, there are communication issues potentially. If you've got people who are, whose language may not be, first language might not be English, that might be difficult. We may not understand each other's senses of humour. So these are things that we need to think about. There's issues of unconscious bias where, you know, we've all got our prejudices. It doesn't only belong to white people. We've all got these prejudices. And that may mean that we mistrust each other or groups. So work has to be done to, you know, foster understanding and training so that we can work better together when there are lots of different people and cultures working together. Too many opinions, you've got lots of people, everybody's got a view. How do you get consensus? How do you move forward? Does it slow down decision making? Again, these are things that, you know, are challenges, but we need to can address. Recruitment, you know, lots of different laws. If you're a company that you recruit internationally, you know, you have to think about those laws in those countries. Professional etiquette. So all of these things, they're not insurmountable. You know, the benefits of having a cultural diversity at work far outweigh any negatives, and it really is all about putting in the effort and training people. So next slide, please. Okay, so how do I get started? Okay, so we've covered some of these things, but yeah, you know, let people know that this is an inclusive company. Train your managers to understand ways to address the potential challenges that we've talked about earlier. Embed fair recruitment practices. You know, have people in place that, you know, advertise your jobs widely. If you just do them through word of mouth, you're just going to get more people who are like you. So you have to work hard on that. Make an effort to learn about other cultures. We've talked about celebrating other cultures. Ensure their different perspectives are valued. Treat others the way that they want to be treated. And if you haven't got you haven't got a diverse workforce. If you're in a company that doesn't have very many people, doesn't mean you can't do any of these things. You know, it's really an opportunity to start thinking about what you could do. It might be that you have pictures around. It may be that you know, make sure you look at what events are happening, religious, cultural events, and you talk about them within your company. There's an awful lot to be done, and that you can do to promote diversity in the workplace. And if obviously anybody needs any help with that, then obviously I'm here that can answer any questions. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I think you touched on a really important point during your presentation, and that was about we all have prejudices against different people. And I think, you know, as individuals, we've got to challenge our own prejudices. We've got to understand them and try and, you know, as you said, learn more about other people. So yeah, definitely thank you so much for that. Over to Avril now, who will be talking about acknowledging your personal cultural difference and allowing it to empower you in the workplace. Over to you, Avril.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone. Good evening, everyone, actually. Can everyone hear me okay? My reception is sometimes quite poor. Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of a different stance. I'm going to first start talking to you a little bit about my story, how that empowers equality and diversity in the workplace. So a little bit about me is that I absolutely love to inspire people to achieve success. So much so, 10 years ago, I actually quit my job doing accounts actually in order to do just that. I was someone that became a young mom at 19 years old. To be honest, to my mom's absolute disgust. She washed her hands of me, I'll be honest with you. And I was out there in the big wide world, having to basically fend for oneself. I come from a Caribbean background, and it was very much a case of, if you think you're a big woman to have to become a parent, then you're a big woman to become independent. So there I was on my own. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to follow my mum's footsteps. I was a uni dropout at the time, to my mum's absolute, you can imagine, despair. So I decided to actually follow in her footsteps. I wanted to live a stable life for me and my son. My mum did accounts. So I thought, that's a stable, opportunity and profession for me to go into and build for me and my son. So I did exactly that. Now, it got to the stage where you realize that after, getting your own house, your own car, great job, everything's stable, you think to yourself, why am I living someone else's dream when I can live my own? And so I plucked up the courage to actually leave my workplace and actually become inspired to actually inspire others, I wanted to see people progress. Now, my son was around five years old at the time, and I wanted to create a world in which he would have great opportunity. That was extremely important for me. So I really believe that everybody, regardless of their past or regardless of their challenges, can achieve success. And I wanted to prove it. So I started to write programs, something I've never done in my life. My hand hit the pen and the paper, and honestly, this amazing course was produced. And I call it a gift. It created itself. So there I was with this amazing, course. And I thought, well, let's test it out. Let's see if it works. So I went to different places around Birmingham. So it was Soho Road. I went to Villa Road. I went to One Stop. I went to town, and I literally stopped shoppers and said, excuse me, are you achieving your full potential? And they must have thought, who is this little girl with all this energy? I wanted to create an environment where they were having or getting to experience a lot of success strategies and principles that would inspire them to achieve whatever their visions were. So, cut a long story short, after delivering these programs in different community centres across Birmingham, we had amazing, what we call now, outcomes, where lots of people were achieving their visions. These were those that were classed as NEETs, not in education or employment or training. These are people that were unemployed, and these are people who were actually employed as well. Some people wanted to become self-employed, some people wanted a job, some people wanted to go back into training. And I was inspired by this. I really wanted to know what's stopping you, And this, to me, was for everybody and everyone from all walks of life. I wanted to inspire the world. After doing this successfully and having all these what we call outcomes, I decided to train myself up. So I'm a master NLP practitioner and transformational specialist. So I work on people's mindsets to help them actually achieve success. So what I did is I wanted to challenge the theory that everybody can achieve success regardless of their past. So I decided to start delivering programs in schools, colleges, universities. And then something said to me, why don't I try a prison? A place to me where there is so much potential, however, channeled in the opposite direction, channeled it in quite a negative way. How could I inspire them to channel this positively? So I wanted to test the theory again that everybody can achieve success. So I went to different prisons across the UK and delivered this course. And thankfully, it had amazing results. So far, I've been into over 25 prisons across the UK, delivering our main program called Realise Your Vision. In doing so, I've met so many people from all walks of life, all different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, different having had different experiences, travelers, you name it, I've met them. We've had some amazing conversations that's really sparked change, and inspired lasting change. I wanted to inspire change that actually lasts. So delivering these programs allowed me to meet so many different kinds of people and actually inspire them so that they can achieve the life that they truly want to. And I believe that everybody can. So in doing so, what I'd be doing is providing services and courses, be it workshops, one-to-ones, and actual programs that were not only accredited and holistic, they were personalized. It took into account their backgrounds, you know, their experiences, and I'd create a very tailored journey for each and every person so that they could actually achieve either entrepreneurship or employment. And in doing so, you could imagine this was not an easy journey, especially being a young Black woman myself. I'm now being thrusted into the criminal justice world, and I have been in for the past 10 years. In fact, actually 9 to be exact, 9 years. I've been delivering within the criminal justice sector. It hasn't been easy. It's very much a predominantly white male middle class environment. And here I am with all my energy, with all my success strategies, with all my programs, actually kicking open this door and actually inspiring lasting change. I came up against so much challenges, red tape, in being able to achieve this. But thankfully, we're able to reach different people from different communities where we're providing services that are culturally appropriate, services that they can actually relate to, you know? It's very important we have a cultural competent team to be able to provide these cultural appropriate services that they can relate to, they can feel comfortable in, they can put down their guards and show us who they really are and what their visions are for the future. So I'm really proud to be able to provide such a journey for each and every individual. It hasn't been easy, but I haven't done this by myself. I've now created a team in order to do so. I've actually also, thankfully, done a TEDx talk on overcoming fear in order to overcome situations where you are the minority, you know, and you have to stand strong in order to do what's right, to actually provide services that's needed. So it's been a journey, but I think we've done so successfully. So if I can just show, can I share my screen, please, Kasim? And I can showcase a few success stories and how we've placed people into environments where they are given opportunity, not only given opportunity, but they've been actually able to progress within that organization and become supervisors and even be on boards where they can implement change. And actually, thank you, thanks a lot. They can actually provide representation where it's really needed. Bear with me, I'm just going to bring it up. Okay. It's loading. While it does, it's great to see people progress, and those that have other types of barriers, you know, it's convictions, you know, there's barriers around race, that's still an issue within the workplace. But once we actually build those partnerships where they understand that our service users do have these types of backgrounds and they are on board with our ethos, what we're all about, they're happy to provide opportunity where they can create a real diverse workforce. Not only does it tick their CSR boxes and all of that in that regard, but it also helps them to change lives. And that's what I'm all about, from all walks of life. So I'm just going to quickly show you a few success stories. Bear with me. Let's see if I can bring this up. Here we are. Will it work? Here we are. I'm hoping I'm pressing the right thing. Can you see this? No? I'm gonna try one more time. Can you see it now? Yes, thankfully. Okay, brilliant. So this is our team at the moment. So far we've got 29 actually at the moment. It was 26 at the time. 2 into entrepreneurship. One's actually up for an award I'm really proud of. And 24, well actually 27 into sustainable employment. So these are the types of sectors that they are in. So HS2, absolutely. As you mentioned it, Asita, wonderful to be able to providing opportunity for our service users. There's food and hospitality, construction, traffic management, warehouse, quite a few. That's Michelle and I doing the trauma therapy work. And moving on, I just want to get to a few of the success stories. Here we are. So this young man now works in a Caribbean restaurant. This is the young man that's up for an award, for Outstanding Business of the Year award. Moving on, this is Kala, who's now become a labourer and got a CSCS card, working in town. Idris, working as the warehouse operative, and Kyle as a barista. There's so much more, but that just gives you a bit of a flavour of the work that we do. But it's so important because we're providing a real balanced workforce to create new opportunities for those that are coming through, and also just to actually create a real difference in that workplace that's more relevant for the real people within that workplace, and the real people that can create solutions for the real world of today. So I hope that helps just understand how that can really empower inclusive and diverse workforce. But also, I'd like to ask everybody here, what is the one thing, now you don't have to answer this now, but it's something to think about, something to reflect on. What is the one change that you could make to make your organization, you know, that you work within, more diverse, more inclusive? And when I say inclusive, actually creating a real voice for those that need one. What difference could you actually make to ensure that your services are even more impactful and relevant for the real people and the real world that we live in? Thank you.
So much for that, Avril, and huge congratulations to you, good self, on all of the success you've done and all of those young people that you've showed us that you've helped. It's a similar area that we work in, and we try and encourage people from so-called hard to reach areas, as I like to say. I hate that word hard to reach, because I don't think anyone is hard to reach, but we're not making the effort to reach them. So it's great to see the work you're doing. I'm going to move on to the questions now, and there's some really interesting questions that have come through. And I'm going to sort of go to the first one, which is an anonymous question. People say allyship is really important, but what does this mean? So, I'm going to start off with my interpretation of what allyship is, and then I'm going to pass it on to you guys to sort of give your input. Earlier on in the year, when the race relations report came out, and there was a lot of talk of the fact that the word BAME shouldn't be used to describe ethnic minority groups, and it was seen as a bit of a dirty word because it just groups all of the people in one sort of under one banner and umbrella. And there were a lot of different debates going on about whether we should use the term BAME or not. And actually, I personally had an opinion, was that the term BAME actually unites us and brings us together, and allows people who, like myself, come from an Asian background to support and be an ally of people from Black backgrounds, people from Chinese backgrounds, and other backgrounds. So actually a term like BAME actually unified us and allowed us to support each other. And I think, just coming on to diversity, another point I like to make is that if you want to fight for diversity and inclusion, you need to think about all protected characteristics and not just think about race, but then you also need to fight for religious equality. You need to fight for disability equality. You need to fight for gender equality, sexual orientation equality. So for me, allyship comes from that, we've all got to be supportive of each other. And that's what it really means to myself. I'm going to pass it on to Erica first. What does allyship mean to you, good self, and how do you think allyship is going to help us in our fight for more equality?
I think we've you touched on a point. I mean, you covered it very, very well, actually, but you touched on a point around, all of the different characteristics. And when you've got a lot of people working together, who don't necessarily all see things in the same way, you've got to work really hard to do that. And not one characteristic supersedes another. So I think there's, you know, it's really important to try and get that balance right that says that, you know, everything's important, but we have to also take what's important for us, but also look at what's important for other people. And I think that we can do an awful lot more around supporting that side of things. So that's, you know, without taking up too much time, I think that's, for me, that's an interesting and very important point.
Sita?
Yeah, thanks for that, Kazim. I think it's an interesting thing, and we use allies a lot at work and all the different places I work for. And I always see it as somebody who's aligned to supporting you and championing your cause, who's not necessarily from your background. So, you know, we talk about allies of women within the workplace, and often there are senior leaders that are men. And so they're in a position, because they have the power and the authority, to be able to support the causes of the experience of women at work, whether it's making flexible working environment or making key decisions that allows them to be able to be themselves at work. But the example you gave there around BAME and that acronym, which captures all the sort of minority groups, is an interesting one, because there is political connotation, there's social connotations with the name, and people see themselves differently to what's been given as an identity. I think is the need to self-identify yourself. When you're an ally, you often see that those who are like you from your background have commonality. But what BAME does, to some extent, there is a generic grouping, but what they don't focus on is the specific experiences of individuals. So the experience of those who are from the Asian background and those from even the Black background, whether they be from Africa or the Caribbean, are all very different, depending which country you come from, depending your generation, etc. And so I think being an ally, you have to really understand those complexities around identity, how people self-identify, and what the challenges are. So yeah, I see allyship as a great thing within the workplace, because often those people who are allies hold the power and the decision making.
Thank you so much, Asita. And Avril?
Thank you. Asita, you've made some great points there, some that I was going to say, so really pleased to read them. Absolutely. I do think allyship is really important in the workplace. People come together to drive, you know, different types of agendas. And I do think if we come together and drive an agenda of personalization, I'll call it, you know, making sure identity is really looked upon individually, you know, I think the word BAME, as we mentioned earlier, I agree with Asita, as much as it's, you know, a word that does include, you know, quite a few different racial backgrounds. And you know, I do think it absolutely does not include quite a lot at the same time. So I think it could be more personalized. And I don't think that word does actually, I think there's some people that are still invisible within that word. So I do think allies, having allyship in the workplace is really important to make sure that we are really appreciating our differences and making sure that everybody does have a voice and using that allyship for that in particularly, rather than just for their own agenda or that agenda. I think it's for everybody's agenda in terms of what's important to them and making sure they have a personalized experience at work.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you so much. Now, another question. Have any of the panelists used cultural competency self-assessment tools? Anyone?
I haven't used self-assessment tools, no.
We've done something close to it. When I say we've done something close to it, when we procure professional services in HS2, often the supplier of that service goes through a competency assessment to see the best fit team. So the team that's best aligned to the culture at work at HS2. So you want a team that, you know, values the very things I talked about. You know, they have integrity, a team that's quite dynamic, etc., and perhaps complementary in terms of culture. So there's a team that have to understand cultural differences and how to manage that. So that does exist, and it's something we've used before.
Brilliant, fantastic. Do you have any tips around speaking up as a minority for more inclusion in the workplace? Interesting question. So, you know, Erica, if I'm an employee of ThinkFest and, you know, I feel like I'm self-employed, but you know, if I want to go up to my managers and say, you know, we need more inclusion, we need more diversity, how can I go, you know, how can I be that person in the organization to drive that change without being a disruptor and without being, you know, getting myself into trouble effectively?
Well, it's always a very interesting one. I mean, I think, you know, Sita talked about, you know, the various support groups and networks. So quite often, you know, if it's a larger size organization or company, that they've got a lot of these networks, and for somebody new coming in, that's great for individuals, because they've got a place, you know, to go and talk to people and talk to colleagues. I mean, I work a lot with small businesses, some of whom aren't that diverse, and when they are recruiting and talking to people, I try and get them to make sure that when individuals come in and they induct them, that they talk about the sort of company it is. And even though there may not be many visibly people of colour there, that actually they want to do what they can to support them. So, you know, it is about building that, you know, people feeling that they've come into an environment where they can speak up, they can ask questions. It doesn't have to be threatening, but issues of race feel threatening for some people, and it can be tricky. But I think if you've got a go-to person, you've got a good line management system, or you've got your networks, that's always a good start to support individuals.
Now, Avril, we know you're outspoken sometimes. Would you encourage people to be disruptive and to, you know, speak up if they don't feel like they're being listened to?
I would. I certainly would. I think there's a way to do it. I do think being disruptive is actually a good thing, because you create change, you break new backgrounds, and change needs to happen. It doesn't mean, you know, being unmanageable or anything like that. It's just keeping it professional, but also speaking your truth. And if you don't feel like, you know, you're being represented or you're being treated fairly, I think it's very important that we have a voice and we were able to share that. Something else that Erica mentioned as well, I think was really important. Yeah, of course, if you've got networks and you've got unions and different places that you can go to for support, definitely utilize those channels. At the same time, I wouldn't stay stump, I wouldn't stay quiet. I would certainly go to your line manager or whoever you feel you can trust to even create those allies, to make sure your voice is heard, because, you know, if your voice isn't heard, you won't you know, get the attention that you deserve. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Avril. Asita, I'm going to come over to you on this point, but also from a different, what I'm trying to look at from this perspective is, yeah, it's great if you've got a DEI department within your organization. Yeah, it's great if their networks are there and stuff like that. But what do you do when, you know, you're feeling resistance and an unwillingness from, you know, management to actually make those changes? So, you know, on the forefront of it, it all looks rosy, you know, yeah, we're diverse, we're inclusive, yada, yada, yada. But what do you do when there's actually real resistance and that there aren't some of the things we've talked about? There aren't the networks there. There isn't someone like your good self who looks after DEI within that organization. What are the sort of recommendations there then?
Yeah, a really great question, because again, I don't know if it's fortunate, but I guess when you work for large companies, you have all the resources to address these things. So you have a HR department, you have diversity specialists. So within the corporate center, there's actually a whole mechanism, and you have policies and protection. When you work for much smaller organizations or sometimes independently, you don't often have those frameworks. So when you get resistant, I think the best thing to do is that you've got to understand what's available to you in terms of challenge. What channels can you go down? Now, that might be through the HR route if it really gets that serious and make it formal. And if you've had a particular experience, then that channel is open to you. I'm not suggesting you raise grievance at any point willy-nilly, but if it's something you feel strongly, you should, because it's there available to you. I think the other thing you should do is be very clear what is it you're challenging, and be very clear of the outcome you expect. Because I think managing expectations is another thing. Some people can get caught up in the process, and it's almost like they've been set up to fail. And then you end up questioning yourself whether you should have done it in the first place because it's not the outcome you expected. And this often happens, particularly to ethnic minorities at work. You're made to believe that the thing you're complaining about is not happening. What's the issue? What's happened? No, it must be all in your mind. Where's the evidence? So you've got to be really watertight in terms of the things you're trying to prove, and say, actually, whether it's through emails, the discussions, meetings, or whatever, you can evidence that you want to challenge that. And make it a point where you then ask for witnesses and make sure there are people there who can actually stand up for you. Your voice alone is not enough. That's one thing I've learned. And your experience is as real as it is not enough to challenge the status quo. And the reason is that often there is a culture at the senior level that protects each other. And you're the lone voice trying to challenge that culture. So the more allies you can have, the more people you can have as witnesses or who knows what's happened, the better it is for you. I remember one time being challenged to say, oh, why are we even doing this whole diversity thing? Because the perception was bringing diverse people in, whether they be women or people from ethnic minority, is actually diluting the quality of candidates and employees that want to work for the organization. And that's a very dangerous premise if you think about what that means. In other words, we don't see there's an actual credible quality candidates coming through from ethnic minority background at professional level. And therefore they think that when you talk about diversity is the sort of entry level. But yes, we do this scheme with this local service provider. We work with Job Centre Plus. We do all of these things which are entry level and about addressing those people who they deem are broken to bring into the organization. And so
very interesting, Asita, you make that point actually, because whenever I talk about diversity, and we talk about specifically with large corporates, and we say, they say, oh yeah, we've hit our quota. And yeah. I give the example of walking into any sort of financial institution. You walk in, bottom floor, customer service, as you said, entry level, majority BAME. You go up the next level, percentages start to drop, but you go up to exec level or even just managerial level, and that diversity is not there. So for me, it's, as you said, it's not that the numbers aren't there. There aren't that many people working in the organization. It's where they're being put in the organization. But then we've also seen that, time and time again, different names on identical CVs, where it's either an ethnic minority or a foreign sounding name with exactly the same skill set as an English sounding name, those people aren't being considered for that same role. So, that unconscious bias does exist, and we've got to challenge that. But we are coming very, very close to the end of this discussion, and I'm sure, this is something we're all quite passionate about, and we could continue to keep talking about. But I just want to sort of touch on one last question from Young, who says, are there any DEI practices that you've seen that people use abroad that we could maybe adopt here in the UK?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think we've followed a lot of processes that people have been adopting abroad. It's difficult because I'm trying to think in terms of the level of legislation in the UK is actually quite strong compared to some countries. So, in Europe, for example, I'm not, I've seen some of the practices that perhaps aren't as strong in some areas. It's a really challenging question, actually. We're always looking for ways we can do things differently. But as each country has some of their own specific cultural issues, it's quite difficult. I mean, you know, things in Ireland, for example, political, so religious discrimination is a really, really big issue, and it's important there and run differently than it is here. So I think we're always looking, but I couldn't give you an example right now to say, right, okay, that's the place to look because they've got it right, because I'm not convinced anybody has yet.
One.
Yeah, CJ, do you want to go on that one?
Yeah, I think there's.
We haven't got long, so.
I know. We've probably looked to the US a lot in terms of things we do around diversity because they've got really good practices. But one thing that comes to mind, and especially when you look at football and sports, is around the Rooney Rule. In America, that's been around since like 2003. And that Rooney Rule means that if you look at NFL players, and that also happened with professional basketball, that for every team that's within their league, and when they're looking for coaches, etc., the rule brought in was to actually, for every time they interview a coach, they need to have one person from a diverse background. So you've got your short list of coaches you want to interview. You've got to make sure that that short list includes one person from an ethnic minority background. We don't have a sort of mandate around that in the UK, especially when it comes to senior leaders in the organization or senior managers. When we're going to recruitment agencies, we don't make a demand that the shortlist must include somebody of a diverse background. But I think something similar to that would be good because it forces people to think differently and to source for candidates differently.
Brilliant, fantastic, Asita. Thank you so much. And I think, you know, just touching on Erica's point, every country has its own challenge. You know, I've been to a number of different countries. South America has its own challenges, which date back to, you know, Spanish and Portuguese colonization of South America. Africa's got its own challenges. North America's got its own challenges. Across the pond in Ireland, we have our own challenges. In France, there are major challenges in terms of, you know, what's secular and what's discrimination. You know, there's a lot that we can learn in terms of what's not been done right in other countries as opposed to what is being done right. So once again, I'd just like to thank our panelists, Erica, Asita, Avril. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know how busy things are, and, you know, giving up an hour of your time is greatly appreciated by everyone at the Chamber. For those of you tuning in today, do not forget, we have got a charity quiz on the 28th of October at the Beer Keller. I will be putting in the ThinkFest Quizzards team in again, who are reigning champions of the quiz that we normally have. So if anyone wants to join my team, do let me know. That's on the 28th of October. And all of the money we raise will be going to our charity, Jericho. And you can learn more about Jericho actually in the Chamberlink magazine on the Future Faces section. We had the pleasure of going down and seeing all the amazing work they're doing to support young people into work. And just following on from this diversity theme that we're doing, our next professional development event will be all about creating an inclusive environment for neurodiverse thinkers. And that will be on the 16th of November. And again, that will be online. And then we've got our Future Faces annual general meeting on the 25th of November. So please look out for details of that. That will be, venue is still to be confirmed, but that's always a great event. And it'll be a great opportunity for everyone to really catch up and see each other again. Once again, thank you to our panelists and thank you so much to everyone for tuning in. Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you all.